general, DJ was a...
Welcome back to the LawNewz Network, everybody. I'm Aaron Keller. We're listening to testimony from Julia Stensky, who was the former girlfriend of defendant David Creato. He's accused of killing his 3-year-old child and leaving the boy's body on a rock in a stream within a mile of his apartment. So, Deborah Blum, we're listening to some of this testimony because the live testimony in the Creato case is going to resume on Tuesday of next week. But part of this clip indicated that it was known that the defendant didn't lock his door, and that she never locked the door, and that the door to the apartment was difficult to lock. Now, does that play into this theory that maybe someone else could have done something to little Brendan?
Absolutely. The defense is trying to bring up the fact that this house was accessible to others, and that since the door was open, somebody else could have come in and taken the child. So I think that the defense should continue to play up this angle that somebody else is responsible for the child's disappearance and death.
It seems like a pretty obvious argument, but it makes me wonder if the jury's going to look at this case and say, wait a minute, a young boy is dead, he was in the father's care, and they're just going to draw a straight line between A and B and say that's enough.
I think a lot of jurors would do that, so I think it's completely possible. Depends on the makeup of this jury. I'm not familiar who's on it. As a defense attorney, you specifically want to pick certain types of jurors based on the crime itself. So this is a murder of a young boy, and that's, as we keep discussing, a terribly tragic thing. So it's very hard for anyone to sit through this type of testimony, but there has to be a specific type of juror that you would want on this, and that's going to be able to be one that questions whether somebody else was involved and isn't just going to think so like in a straight line. You want somebody that's able to think outside of the box, because that's what you're asking the jurors to do.
So if you were defending this particular client, how would you try to tie up these ends and raise enough reasonable doubt to just dispatch with the state's case here?
Well, I think that the defense is doing a good job at pointing out the things that they need to. And they're pointing out that more DNA evidence could have been tested for. The police didn't do that. They didn't go to the scene until 5 days later to do certain testing. That there were other leads.
We have 3 autopsies in this case and a medical examiner who has a sketchy past in another state. So how many medical examiners did we need to look at this? First, we had the senior local medical examiner, and then we had his deputy underneath him, and then we had the state medical examiner who's a step above the senior local guy. So we had 3 different looks at this poor little toddler's case, and yet the cause of death is still really hard to figure out. I mean, they're saying it's homicidal violence, but they're just saying that because they're assuming it was homicidal violence. So, you know, ultimately it's asphyxiation. Did he drown? Was he strangled? I mean, we don't really know. And yet, after 3 investigations, there are a lot of what ifs.
Right, there are a lot of what ifs, but that's not the clincher in this case for me, because this little boy shouldn't have been there. So either somebody took him, or what the prosecution is asking the jurors to believe is that the father is responsible for bringing him there and his demise. So I don't necessarily take issue with the fact that there isn't a cause of death. Then it becomes what the question and the focus there should be is, did this little boy wander off on his own to that area? And the answer seems like a logical no, because his socks were clean, so somebody had to carry him there. So I think that what the defense needs to continue to focus on is poking these holes, continuing to reiterate that the police didn't do a thorough investigation. Jurors seem to love it when people have a troubled past. You know, I think that was an issue that we talked about a lot on Aaron Hernandez, was the fact that Bradley had an extremely troubled past and the jurors were being asked to believe him. And you just can't believe somebody that's not credible.
And the center of the state's case here is this former girlfriend who we're listening to, Julia Stensky, because she didn't like the little boy. And the insinuation is that because she didn't like the little boy's presence in the relationship, that the father killed his own son so that he could continue the relationship with this woman. I mean, it's a compelling narrative, but I mean, it's a bit of a stretch too, because this particular defendant just really doesn't have a past that's that troubled. And then we heard over and over again that he was defending Brendan, saying Brendan will always be in my life.
Right. I mean, he definitely reiterates that Brendan will always be in my life, that yes, you're the love of my life, but that my son isn't going anywhere. So I certainly don't think that there are any outcries here that would rise to the level of thinking that this man would murder his child.
Let's listen to some more of Julia Stensky's testimony. These are the last few questions that she